Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second half of this afternoon's entertainment, as it were. Thank you very much for staying on. My name is Kevin Warley. I was chair of the trustees and I'm still a member of the library itself. Originally, our fairly new library manager, Darren Bevan, was supposed to be giving this lecture, but unfortunately he's now indisposed. And I'm sure we wish him all well and hope to see him back in the library fairly quickly. So it's been converted from a lecture into a PowerPoint slideshow. So we'll start off with the brief history of the library. What is the library? Well, it's one of the oldest surviving literary institutions around in Devon and Cornwall. Still follows very similar, the same rules and beliefs since it was founded in 1810. And although it's had various problems during its 213-year career, we're still here, and as Abs was saying earlier, it's got to be preserved, and I think that's the feeling of all the subscribers. We do have one major item from our founding early days, but we still have the original signboard. And if you look at some of the old photographs that pop up every now and then in the library, we'll see that signboard virtually in all of them. Well, Plymouth, as a naval base, has always prospered from war. We prospered right up to the end of the Cold War, when the peace dividend was used to run down the dockyards and basically reduce the amount of money coming into the city. But at different times, especially after during the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Plymouth was thriving. Money was pouring in, there was shipbuilding, there was accommodation for naval officers, there was the Royal William Victualling Yard built, the dockyard was expanded. It was a boom town, and it was expanding. Plymouth Dock, as it was called, was expanding outside its boundaries. It became bigger than the town of Plymouth and created a lot of rivalry. But because of that, there was money to do various vanity projects. And one of the vanity projects at that time was to have they called it a public library, but it was basically a private subscription library in your town. And in 1810, the local worthies, who were very rich, decided Plymouth needed a big vanity project. So they decided to have a hotel, a beautiful theatre, and all the ancillary premises, one of which would be a public library, which would have been a subscription library. So the well-heeled all got together. They called a public meeting in what was the old Guildhall, and they said, "We are intending to build a library, who's interested?" So they had a vote on it at the end of the meeting, and they decided to go ahead. So, Royal Hotel was built, the Theatre Royal was built, which attracted a lot of people into Plymouth, and the library was set up with its own separate rules, which they called laws, and the ethos of the library. The building was planned, but they didn't really know what to do. So they had to raise the money first. So it was owned by the subscribed proprietors, who are basically directors and shareholders. And they subscribed 30 guineas. Now, 30 guineas was a lot of money, and you put it into modern terms, it was more than what the working man was earning in a year. So that's how well-heeled you had to be. Plus, you had to pay an annual subscription, which could be an extra 3 guineas on the top. So, but it took off. They were going to limit the number of subscribers, the parties at 100, but they actually were persuaded to limit it to 102. But there was no other library. There had been one at Devonport Dock for a while. It didn't last very long. So everybody had to travel to Plymouth. So shares were issued like a normal company. So you became a proprietor. and you could buy and sell your shares on the local stock exchange, or you could just bequeath them or give them away. It decided to change its name after a while because it was clashing with the local authority maintained library, which was completely free and available to everybody. So it became the Plymouth Proprietary Library to show that it was owned by its proprietors. And at that time there was still 6 of the original founders around, still very influential. Hawker was a very wealthy merchant. John Harris of Bradford House, his ancestors had been bankers to people like Walter Raleigh, Francis Drake, all the others, and it was the big mansion in Plymouth where they had the famous Armada dinner to celebrate the victory of the Spanish. William Langmead, again, prominent businessman. William Prance, his name is around William Prance Road, again a local businessman. And Robert Fuge, not known about now, but at that time, a very prominent man. Everybody would have known him. Okay. Henry Woolacombe had a big estate at Hemerdon House, which is still there. George Eastlake, he was very influential in London. He was a founder of one of the big portrait galleries in London. Edmund Lockyer, again, was involved, London and Plymouth. And Dane John Hawker, very rich man as well as being influential. Well travelled. So they decided the library had to be impressive, and they were absolutely overawed by John Foston, a London architect, who had designed the Theatre Royal and the Royal Hotel in Plymouth, and various other establishments around, such as the Egyptian House at Devonport Guildhall, which is very impressive, and houses around Stoke for the Royal Naval officers. So that was the final library when it was built. It's in the Greek style. It's interesting because there were no windows at the front. Light came in a beautiful glass cupola in the roof, which became known over the years as the Foston Lantern. So you walk down Cornwall Street and you, wow, that would be the building. But everybody was pleased because they liked the look of the library, they liked the impression it gave that Plymouth was going somewhere, and it had plenty of books in it. So again, you could be 2 classes of member. Proprietor, you bought a share into it. Subscriber, you actually just paid an annual fee to borrow the books. But it was 2 guineas or 3 guineas, depending on your rate. But you could also nominate people to use your ticket, as it were. And so you nominated your family to come in, your daughter or your son, to use the library. Same way you would have a gift subscription now. Rules and regulations were very, very strict. It's run very, very, shall I say, to the letter. In the minutes, there's various examples of people being excluded, disciplined, or suspended for doing things. But the interesting thing was, if one of a series of books was damaged or lost, you had to pay for the replacement of the whole run. So bearing in mind, sometimes an encyclopedia would run to 10, 15, 20 editions, 20 volumes. Perhaps you took it home, your dog or your child damaged one, you had to pay for the whole lot again. And you had to be prepared to do that, so you'd obviously had to have money in the bank. And there was simple fines for any defacement. Writing in the book, perhaps leaving coffee stains in it. But the main thing was, the newsroom was very popular. And when the newspapers used to arrive on the stagecoach, probably late afternoon, there would be a mad scramble into the library, and probably arguments who could read what first. But to ensure you all had a fair crack of the whip, there was a sandglass, and woe betide anybody who had kept their paper after the sandglass had run out. The time certainly ran out for them. But it was a very strictly run library. The opening hours, 8 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock every day apart from Sunday. Of course, it wasn't open on Good Friday, or it wasn't open on Christmas. But you had to apply to the librarian in person. It was not a case of going, picking a book off the shelf. You had to ask the librarian if you could go and look for it. Only 2 books as opposed to our virtually limited amount. But the library was always, shall I say, policed, either with the librarian, and the librarians, looking through the minutes, had a reputation for being Rottweilers, to be honest with you. They guided the library and its assets as though it was their own. And a porter at some other times, and a porter and his wife were responsible for maintaining the open fires and cleaning the premises and ordering the sacks of coal and etc. etc. But if you upset the committee, it will be tied you. This is one of the earliest books, printed in Naples, 1776. Fairly common book of its time. Dante's Divine Comedy, which was very popular in the original Italian, and that's still around in the library. So, it wasn't actually a light reading library in its intention. Very much history, natural history, biography, and of course, as soon as any advancement in science came out, any books issued on the subject were immediately purchased, and they were bought into, so you could keep. So if you were a professional like a surgeon or a lawyer, you could keep up to date with the various new trends and philosophies in the world. The library also received the bequest of the Halliwell Phillips collection. James Orchard, who became known as James Halliwell Phillips, was a Shakespearean scholar, and he had, and to quote Sotheby's catalogue, either bought or stolen manuscripts of various collections and kept them to himself. And he gave a Shakespeare First folio, which over the years became so valuable that the proprietors had no option but to sell it to keep the library going. But we have the remnants of his collection on the back of the room in the glass cabinet. But that's a sort of diversity, so very much part of the original collection, everything from road making by McAdam, right down to Darwin travelling around the world, how to measure the magnetic intensity of a chronometer, very important, naval base, a lot of shipping in and out of the port, they needed to know the latest information on that. Smallpox, inoculation, very much in vogue. Was it good, was it bad? COVID, same thing applies today. And I like the one on irritated fever or dockyard disease. I mean, in my life, dockyard disease is something to do with skiving. But very much serious books, and by authors well known in their fields in their day. Humphrey Davy, for example. Other books, of course, we had selection novels, which are regarded as light reading. Daniel Defoe, Walter Scott, Jonathan Swift, very much a depository of the Waverley novels, which are becoming very popular with Queen Victoria and Prince Albert traipsing over Scotland. And as it says, they were constantly added together with the London and provincial journals. And the library eventually built up a collection of 20,000 volumes. So it was a major collection. It would take a long time to read. So building was enlarged at numerous times, and that in 1853 it was enlarged. It became a conventional looking building with windows at the front. And if you remember the other line drawing of the original library, there was a short terrace here, steps leading up, all that gone, right out to the edge of the road. That's how much they needed the space. Women in the library. Now, we're talking about an era where emancipation of women was being pushed for, but wasn't actually working. Women, with most circumstances, weren't allowed to own land, weren't allowed to own money, have bank accounts. If they did, it was in their father ran it for them, or their husband, or even their fiance. So this is so proprietors allowed the women into the library. They allowed them a lot of freedom, and they even were allowed to suggest books, but didn't quite go their way. There was only one lady proprietor. She was probably a widow, because she had no man to run the account for her. So, as it says, women tend to use the library as nominees of proprietors or subscribers, so you wouldn't come in on your card, you would come in on your husband or father's card. But they couldn't use the newsroom. We can't have women going into the newsroom, that's too... But they changed the rules to upset the women. I don't think they intended to upset the women, but they should have seen it coming. So a woman couldn't use another member of her family's ticket to come into the library. She now had to pay an extra half guinea to a lot of women who didn't have an income. That was a banning order, basically. But it didn't work out as easy as the committee thought. There was absolute mayhem broke out. There was talks of marching on the library, getting the male subscribers to boycott the library. But what really tipped the committee into rescinding the rule was they published a lament written by A. Perry, which appeared in the Western Daily Mercury. And it says, and so the room that once was bright, and me those vacant places, will never see the light of those fair women's faces. And the committee were described as a herald of their age, and there was uproar, you can imagine it. So the committee backtracked immediately and rescinded the rule. But also at the same time, when the public library was opened by the Plymouth Borough Council, they probably realised there was competition and they had to change their mindset. So after 1876, men and women had the same rights. You didn't need to go through your father or your husband or your fiance or even your brother. You could be a subscriber or a proprietor in your own right. But then books changed slightly, and one of the librarians, Mr. Whitmarsh, complained that he was issuing more novels than he wanted to. It was a wasted time, and that's not what he was going to be. But he said, work he was taken up with the issuing of magazines and novels. The work is too monotonous to be cheerful, and the literature too flimsy for retention. So obviously not a man who read much liked fiction. I'm now encroaching on somebody else's ground, and I see you sitting in the back, so I've got to get this right. But the Cottonian collection came to Plymouth. Basically, no other local authority was able to take it on because of its sheer size and the rules that the Cotton family imposed on looking after it. It was a residue of a series of grand tours around Europe. It came down through the family, and the family sold off various items that were quite valuable. And basically, Plymouth accepted it because the proprietary library was prepared to build an extra room called the Cottonian Library here, and to accommodate it all. But the strict rules were that visitors could only visit on certain days. They had to put the name in the visitor's book, and basically it was still looked after as a unique collection. But the family was so determined that it was going to be correctly looked after that they pushed an act through Parliament, and it's still valid after an amended act. The library still appoints 3 representatives to the City Council Cottonian Collection Committee. And the Cottonian Collection went up to what is now the box. And if you go there, you'll see most of this furniture there. These special library cabinets that accommodate the large books so the bottom didn't fall out, which is a common thing in libraries. A lot of these paintings and these cabinets. And there was also in the proprietary library, a frieze around the wall. So if you get the chance to go to the box, go into the Cottonian collection, go into the Cottonian room when it's not used for research, and you'll probably see a lot of stuff that you can imagine being in a special room in this library. Anyway, we move on to the 20th century. Things change. Up to the end of the 19th century, the library was on the up. It was getting members. It was paid off its debts. It was chugging along. The Great War came along. The rules were changed. You could join if you were of a military rank of a certain junior officer and above. So you didn't need a reference. You didn't need anybody to propose you. You could just walk in and say, this is my rank. I'm entitled to a membership. So that's regarded as when the library started to become a popular public library. It coasted, the library, the war finished, the library then coasted through the 1920s and 30s. Like every other business, after the 1929 crash, it had major shareholdings, lost a lot of money, and negotiated with Dingoes, who had a shop at the other side of Cornwall Street, to change the front to 2 huge great shop fronts and rent them out to Dingoes for display to get some income. That's the situation the library was in. There's also in the archives, there's letters arguing who is responsible for looking after the drains, how much money they could spend on the roof of the library. The library was starting to crumble a bit. And a lot of the older families had withdrawn, they weren't interested. There's so many other ways of getting reading material. And then 1939, Second World War broke out. The government had made a lot of mistakes during the phony war, withdrawn a lot of air raid precautions because they didn't think war was going to happen. But they made the major blunder thinking that German air bombers couldn't fly from Germany to Plymouth and back. They'd need refueling. That's impossible, that would happen. 1940, with the fall of France, the Germans just moved right to the coast, took over all the airfields, and they were in a short bombing distance of Great Britain. Plymouth was on the front line. 1941, famous night of the Plymouth Blitz, 21st to the 22nd of March. Worst bombing in Plymouth's history, more casualties, more buildings lost, complete wake-up call. None of the firefighting facilities worked, they didn't fit together, they had all sorts of problems. Water pressure disappeared, there wasn't any water supply, fire engines were in the wrong place. It's the first time there'd been verge of absolute chaos, and unfortunately the library suffered. So this is the library here burning in George Street, an incendiary device. The fire party was outside watching, and the incendiary device went through the glass cupola on the roof, straight into a room full of books, and that was it. There's no way that they could put the fire out for the previous reasons. So unfortunately the library burnt down, 40,000 books disappeared, and start of a different era. That's the morning after. There's the library. That was Freeman, Harding, Willis. They went completely, and that photograph is taken through what was Dingoes. Dingoes is gone, and all the damage along here. There was a debate on whether the library should be rebuilt, and then the plan for Plymouth came out, and the area was zoned for shops. So there was a lot of debate, where is the library going to be? And because of the prevarication by Plymouth City Council over a site at the top of Cornwall Street between what is now the Methodist Central Hall and the shops, no decision was made, so they decided, look, if the library is going to continue, we have to find some other premises. But as Paymaster Captain Gertie, who was the secretary, said, a few hours, 132 years of work disappeared. There's 40 books in a bank vault. They were the basis of what we have on that table. And the Hannibal Phillips collection. The Cottonian collection was, at that time, of course, in the care of the City Council. That had been moved out of Plymouth. Fortunately, because the museum and the library had a direct hit. And this is all they found the next morning when they came to survey the premises here. Very sad, very depressing. But they managed to find somewhere they thought would make an excellent library. So they managed to take on the lease of our last place of residence, which in those days was one Alton Terrace at the top of North Hill. And a lot of this woodwork here was built to fit into that library. So the library was the bottom 2 floors, and a rented flat there provided an income. So an appeal was made for people to donate books, to return books that had been in their house. So we had quite a few books returned, and new ones were issued. So within 2 years, it had a collection that was big enough to say we can carry on as normal. Well, today it's moved into new premises. It's the premises in North Hill being on numerous floors, completely unsuitable to modern requirements. The ground floor was step-free, but the facilities for toilets, thankfully, were up 2 flights of stairs. It was completely unsuitable for anybody who had any form of disability, and it would have taken a lot of money to convert it to what was regarded as acceptable. So it's now changed to down here with its flat floor and everything on the same floor, cosy rooms, and excellent coffee and comfortable chairs. And I think we all benefit from that. Since the library has, over the years, it's had a large Heritage Lottery grant, which enabled it to sponsor Father Gregory to study a Jacobean prayer book and to have Wyndham papers analysed by a professor at Exeter University. And John Day's report is available if anybody hasn't had a copy yet. There's numerous copies available. So it's all still moving on. We may not attract the young people, which is our future, but we're trying to maintain the heritage. So that's it, basically. We've got modern, we've got computers, we've got Wi-Fi, and we have regular meetings, and we have book clubs, we have book reading clubs, we have books choosing clubs, writing, poetry. Everything is here. And as Roy Bradley says, without libraries, what have we? We have no past and no future. So that's where we are today, and that's all our contact points. All right, thank you very much. I hope.